Hello and welcome to GM Tips, the show where my friends and I share with you our thoughts and suggestions on how to game master your role-playing game. I'm your host, Satine Phoenix, co-creator of Maze Arcana and a dungeon master for D&D. Today's theme is combat quality over quantity. In decades past, fine stories told revealed monsters and heroes and treasures of gold, the capture of which required brawn and steel, blood and magic and slaughter so real, the gore and vile matter reveal sights surreal, real confrontations of word, wit, and zeal enchant my play brain, but GMs like this too complex to attain. The mind wants more, a personal tale of skill checks and will saves and options galore. Let's take a moment to explore more ways to score game masters too bored of dungeon crawls and war. We must build an army of GMs who will play the many ways we wish, for this is how we grow as game masters. If you're at one of my tables, you'll notice I can go entire sessions without combat. The first few episodes of Fury's Reach were exciting for the characters as they explored the wonders of Port Nyanzaru, a tropical exotic city run by merchant princes where dinosaur races through the streets and shopping mall ziggurats are common. To me, integrating characters into the world is the most important first step to an ongoing campaign. It sets the groundwork for how the players interact with NPCs and the dangers around them. Have your characters talk to locals, even just ask for directions. Fill the environment the way you would imagine the space. You don't have to pre-write all 5,000 locals' backstories, but when the area is dense with people, make the players feel it. If it's empty, make them feel that too. Chult was fun. They went shopping, it's crazy. And they got to stay at an extravagant inn, try the local fruit, and learn about a certain satchel shop. They even got to participate in a dinosaur race. Some of these encounters were playful and some were challenging, but weaved in and out of these lighthearted times were warnings about the jungle. The jungle is dangerous. The jungle will kill you. You cannot come back from death because the death curse. Or, we are rationing healing potions because you cannot come back from death. The party had fun, they went exploring, and I was successful in instilling fear about the danger. And then the danger happened. Here's the thing about combat-light campaigns. It's not that the combat is easy, it's that the few times it happens, it's incredibly meaningful. Players need to use strategy to solve these lethal combat puzzles. The things that are out to get you really want to kill you or capture you. It's life or death to them as well. I don't want to bring too much reality into the game, but I want you to have the same hesitation about fighting as you would in real life. Even a fighter should be a little afraid of dying. The TLDR. Tip number 1, start light. The players get comfortable and fall in love with their characters, personalizing their experiences. And then, tip number 2, lethal combat puzzles. By limiting the amount of combat and raising its danger level, the players are so invested in their characters, they can't afford for them to die. Excitement! Not everyone wants emotional roleplay, but for those of us who do, this kind of care in designing your campaign will evoke the many feels from your players. I could roll on, but instead, let's discuss this with Vampire the Masquerade producer at White Wolf Entertainment, Jason Carl. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Satine.
We are talking today about combat light, and you and I have been discussing the new Vampire the Masquerade, and the mechanics of it kind of promote that. Can you talk about? Are you allowed to talk about the new mechanics a little bit?
I'll tell you what I can tell you about 5th edition Vampire mechanics. And you're right. We have streamlined the combat system to make it faster and a little less intrusive. Combat mechanics still exist in Vampire. Who doesn't love vampire combat? But we want to give storytellers and game masters the option to take the focus off the granular mechanical process of combat and infuse fighting with a lot of emotion and a lot of drama, and to make their combat scenes very visceral and very, very immediate. And the ways that we are doing that are still in development, but I can at least talk about the big concepts with you.
Okay, cool. Rules in Vampire. You mentioned that there aren't any rules except for combat.
There are rules for everything, including combat, but we give game masters the ability to shift the focus away from the rules at a moment's notice and to carry on with scenes without ever rolling dice if that's what they want to do. The rules for combat are a little bit more robust, a little bit more granular out of necessity because combat's very uncertain. You never know exactly what's going to happen and there are so many variables to account for. But there's this area outside combat where things get a little less precise. Some game masters call that the fruitful void, which is a fancy term for, we don't really know what's happening over here, but it's so interesting that we're going to explore it.
So it's more improv then, is what you're saying?
A lot more improvisational, a lot more personal, and much, much more immediate as well.
How do people respond to that in the playtest? Because from a lot of people I play with, they like having all the rules there so that they can play within that, but it sounds like it's more of a dance between the storyteller and players.
It can be more of a negotiation, and I think it's fair to say that some players found it very, very liberating. The combat moves so quickly and so dramatically that I think they forgot that they didn't have all the rules that they were used to having, which was great because they got very, very emotionally excited. You know, they would jump up from their chairs and they would shout and they would cringe or gasp or chuckle or kind of laugh evilly when they scored a great critical, a messy critical is what we call it.
A messy critical.
A messy critical.
Okay, can you elaborate on that more? Because right now it's all theory, but can you give an example of what a combat encounter might be?
Yeah, combat for vampires is extraordinarily dangerous. These are immortal creatures, and they're tough. They can take a hit better than an ordinary human being. Well, you're not really an ordinary human being, but the rest of us are ordinary mortals, and they can really take a hit. But the stakes for them are incredibly high. They've lived for centuries, maybe even millennia. Anything that can kill them ends that existence forever. Can you imagine how intimidating that would be to enter combat with a creature that could end your centuries-old existence like that?
God, that sounds sad.
Isn't it terrible?
I would try to avoid combat in that case.
So for many vampires, combat is the court of last resort. It is the thing that they will avoid at all costs. Now, not all vampires are that sensitive or clever, especially the young or the anarchs. There are some vampires that live for the thrill of fighting, but they quickly learn how dangerous that is. And the older they become, often the more reluctant they are to take that step into the arena of fatality. And so to reflect that in Vampire the Masquerade, we provide a very narrative, quick rule system, almost cinematic. It doesn't get down to a very detailed level in the way some role-playing games do. Not that those aren't fun, but for Vampire, we really want to play up the fear and the drama of that risk, that huge risk.
So instead of saying, okay, here is you're in regular gaming like I do, it's you're hired to do a thing, you go to a place, you have an encounter, you get the treasure. This is more, you're really playing in a story, you're going through to a situation. It's
very situational. It's very circumstantial. We encourage vampire game masters to create situations instead of missions. Vampires are about hunger. They're unliving creatures that thirst for blood, and they have to deal with that hunger every moment of their existence. When they wake up, they're hungry. When they're driving their cars, they're hungry. When they're visiting their mortal girlfriend who doesn't know that you're a vampire, you're hungry. And that hunger presses in on you. We call it the beast. And that's the core theme of Vampire, the struggle of your humanity to save itself against the pressures of that beast. That hunger is what drives these situations. The default scene in Vampire is a hunt for blood.
Well, that's actually interesting because you can use that in other games. The idea that there's a part of you that you're conflicted with, that you're fighting against, and taking that and remembering that while you're in an encounter, while you're in another situation talking to another person. Like, people don't think, from my experience, I find people don't think that deeply about their characters. They're so ready to just go in, fight, do the thing, get the treasure. So it's actually really fascinating.
It's actually incumbent on the game master to remind the players of that truth, and that comes from knowing the player characters exceptionally well and understanding what motivates and drives them and figuring out what their virtues and vices are. And in Vampire, it's all about remembering what connects them to their humanity. Maybe it's their mortal lover, like we talked about, but maybe it's their old friends from their neighborhood that they maintain as a touchstone to what still burns in their chests. That spark of humanity, that one last string that connects them to their old life. The game master needs to remember that for each and every character at the table and play those strings to stretch them near to breaking, to put them in danger, to make sure that the vampire is always remembering that that's the risk. I might lose my humanity. If I let my blood hunger, if I let my thirst for blood get out of control, if I don't deal with the beast, those touchstones to humanity could snap.
That's really cool. So earlier in my monologue, I talked about combat light and quality over quantity.
Yes.
So this is interesting because I find that creating this in-depth knowledge within the character makes those things more dangerous. So you're saying you have the mechanics for that in your game.
We do have the mechanics for it, and they can be as granular and sophisticated as the game master wants them to be. But we also provide a way for them to be condensed and to become almost unobtrusive. You wouldn't even know the mechanics are really there.
Nice. Okay. Politics, intrigue, romance.
Vampires love these things. Combat is only one kind of conflict. Social situations, political situations, romantic situations, those are conflict too.
There can be a lot of conflict in romantic situations.
I don't know what you mean. And they have rules too, and those rules are also, they come in an abbreviated light form to make them very quick and to help the player focus on the emotions of their character and the emotions at the table. But they can be resolved just like combat can through a series of roles, if you prefer, but also through just a sequence of choices and actions to keep the emotion levels very high.
Hunger.
Hunger. Here's a practical example. In Vampire the Masquerade, we represent hunger through dice, so there are some rules for it. And as your hunger increases, the more hunger dice you accumulate. And those hunger dice are rolled every time you have to resolve a dramatic action.
Oh.
Like combat. And if the hunger dice come up a particular number, that's when the beast rears its ugly head and snarls for release. You have to deal with the hunger in that moment, regardless of what you're doing. Usually at a very inconvenient time.
Oh, that's so nice.
And that's the dramatic tension of the game. The choice you make. Do I give in to my hunger right now and let a terrible thing happen? Or do I spend a composure point and maintain my cool for now, knowing I will have to pay later? And that's the game of risk management that all vampires have to face.
Oh, that sounds very dangerous. So much intrigue.
Well, I hope so.
So you've been LARPing for a while, yes?
Yes, I've been live action role playing for a long time.
What are elements in LARPing that you've brought to your table that you find benefit?
Well, in tabletop role playing games, the ratio of game master to player is very small. There is a game master and there are 3, 4, 5, maybe up to 10 players depending on the size of your group. In live action role playing, that ratio is very big. It's 1 game master to 20, 30, 50 players. The largest LARP I've ever run was a vampire LARP for about 600 players, and we only had 10 game masters. So the scope is very different. And that's where situations and not missions come in. It's not possible to give a mission to 600 vampire players. So you have to create those situations. And you need to give them conditions in which they can shine or fail depending on what those very personal motivations are. And I try to bring that to my table too, so whether I'm playing Vampire or Dungeons and Dragons, I try to bring that same technique along with me.
Cool. Are you ready for your 3 questions?
Do your worst.
Okay. What is your pre-game house rule?
Pre-game house rule is that everybody reminds themselves of what the story is. So we go through a little ritual and we talk a little bit about what is the story. It's not just rolling dice, it's everything that you're doing. It's thinking, it's choices, it's not making choices. Those are all parts of the story.
Nice. What's your favorite GM moment?
My favorite GM moment was that 600-person vampire game because half our storytellers didn't show up and we didn't know what we were going to do. So we had to improvise most of it.
Wait, so you had 10, but you were supposed to have 20?
Yes. It was a great night. It was wonderful. It was terrifying and marvelous.
We'll do it live.
That's pretty much what happened. And I don't know that we would ever recreate it.
Yeah, you live and learn. Tip to the audience.
Trust yourself and your players.
That's nice. I
Yeah,
like that.
you know what you're there for. You know what you want to do, and as long as you are communicating those truths to each other, it is not possible to have a bad time.
That's the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you around. Please share with everyone where they can find you on the internet.
If they want to find me personally, they can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vampires in Vino, because my other passion besides vampire stories is wine.
You have a fabulous Instagram.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you like it. It's a lot of fun.
Before we go, I'd like to give a shout out to Jerry Holkins from Penny Arcade for inspiring that bit of poetry at the beginning of the show. As always, I'm Satine Phoenix at Satine Phoenix. You can ask me GM tip questions at #AskSatine. Watch Dread on ProjectAlpha.com. Pick up and play one of my Guild Adept supplements for the Tomb of Annihilation at DMsGuild.com. Catch me live every Sunday at noon on Maze Arcana's Orphan Echo on twitch.tv/Maze Arcana, and every Tuesday night, Dungeon Mastering on twitch.tv/D&D. Thanks for watching us here on Geek and Sundry, and see you next time. Jason, would you please GM us out of here?
Let's do it vampire style. Close your eyes. Our story starts this morning when the good people of the city are awakened by their alarms to go to school, to go to work. But not you. Because when the sun's in the sky, you're asleep. It's not any sleep, though. Because when you sleep, your lungs don't breathe, your limbs don't move, and your heart doesn't beat. Because you're a vampire. You don't come alive until the sun is set. And at that precise moment when the sun dips below the horizon, that's when your eyelids flicker, when your fingers twitch, when you wake up. Because now it's the vampire's time. And when you wake up, you turn your head to the side and see something on your pillow that wasn't there when you went to sleep. A little metal disc that looks like this. What do you do?